Still on, right?
Pardon me?
Still on.
He was likely not able to jump on, so I can speak to the financials briefly. I think it's laid out pretty self-explanatory, but I can give an overview of how it's doing. Did you need a copy?
Okay, good evening, everybody. I call this meeting of the Renewable Energy Fund Grant Review Board 1 Subcommittee to order on this Tuesday, June 28th, 2022. Myself, Councillor Nathan Tamman, in the chair. I will advise all those that this meeting is being recorded in the interest of transparency and open government, and will be posted on the township's website subsequent to this evening's proceedings. So our first item on the agenda is an adoption of the agenda as published. Are there any edits, errors, and to add? Kirk?
Are we formally going to be receiving the financials? 1, 2, do we have a status of Ward 2, 3 application we did last time? 3, there's nothing listed here about recommendations, the policy changes that we talked about last time.
I noticed the latter point. I think I will grant us to be able to add that towards the end of the agenda. We can motion for that. In terms of your other two, I can hand those over to Brandy. I can speak for the Ward 2 subcommittee. I was informed that on the item that we share in common, which is the township's application, that the Ward 2 3 subcommittee did vote to recommend that council approve that.
I'm not looking for discussion right now. I'm really looking to have those items added because they're not on the agenda. So we need to receive the financials and we need to discuss what we do or don't hear from there. That's all.
Yeah, we can add that as an amended item.
Yep.
The 3 of them.
I'll move approval of the agenda before changes.
As amended. Thank you, Diane. Make a seconder. Julie. Call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any? None. Motion carried. Number 2, declaration of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof. Seeing none.
Are you going to declare a conflict of interest with respect to you and the letter you wrote? Right, so.
No. Number 3, minutes, notes from previous meetings. Diane.
I would like to move approval of the minutes with the correction of item. Christie is here. She actually moved to receive the review of policy of the terms of reference. I really think that should be to receive the renewable energy vibrancy policy and the terms of reference. It's just minor correction because we are receiving the review, we're receiving the policy.
Second. Correct. Okay. Call the question. All those in favor, raise a hand. Okay, motion carried. No unfinished business list. Reporting from council, community grant fund review. So on to item number 7.1, Loyalist Township, and I understand that Randy Mazzarani is here to answer any questions and potentially give brief comments. Over to you, Rami.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the members of the committee. So the application that's put forward in front of you is to help fund the design of a upgraded community center or upgraded to the W.J. Henderson Recreation Center. We've put in an application to all 3 wards with 25% of the requested funds coming from Ward 1 and 75% of the funds coming from Wards 2 and 3. So speaking to tonight's the request to the Ward 1 subcommittee is $167,500. Really, the purpose of this budget is to cover the external costs associated with developing detailed designs for the upgrades to this facility. And what I mean by that is once the detailed design is done, we would have enough information to be able to give to a builder and say, this is the facility that needs to be built. Please go ahead and proceed with construction. So that's the level of detail that's going into the work here. So just as a quick summary, the facility itself or the project itself covers a few different aspects. So number one, it's to construct a new aquatic facility, which involves a 8-lane, 25-meter competition-ready pool, as well as a leisure pool. And then there's also upgrades to the existing facility, which cover primarily making the remainder of the facility accessible to the public in its entirety. So the reason that we put forward this application to the Renewable Energy Benefit Fund is because we feel that it does have a benefit to the township as a whole, but also the fact that this facility, by being upgraded, would have a fairly big tourism draw because it would be able to host regional championships for swimming. So there would be ancillary benefits to the township in the form of additional revenue through tourism and other things like that. And then the last part of it is the project itself is being designed to help the township meet its climate targets. The fact that there's an arena and a pool on the same site actually presents a fair amount of synergies, which can help reduce our emissions as a community. So by that, I mean that the excess heat that is generated through the ice making process for the arena can actually be recaptured and used to heat the pool, which significantly reduces our dependence on natural gas and will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and our footprint as a whole. So those are the main facts that I wanted to cover before taking any questions that any members of the committee might have.
Questions?
So it's, my understanding is a complete new pool aquatic center, and then the upgrades, are those also for accessibility, are those also to the rink?
Correct, yes. So
the whole rest of the facility?
yes, so it would make the facility accessible. So the arena portion is, so especially the change rooms aren't exactly accessible, and the rink itself doesn't meet accessibility requirements, so we would cover that through this project as well.
Thanks.
I think personally, I think this is a great idea. And I think it's appropriate use of this money. I guess the only thing is it really relates to the policy and the 75,000 maximum. So I think I'm just going to mention that. I'm not opposed to approving this or recommending approval of this application, but I would just note that it's contrary to what the policy is.
If we're getting into comments, it's contrary on 2 fronts. One is it's going to set a completely new precedent with respect to the size. It's also going to sit back and have a new precedent with respect to it's funding 100% of what's asked for here. There's no additional revenue stream. Because the policy right now requires that no more than 75% is to be funded from the grants. So I'm sort of looking at it and going, I agree with you, Diane. I think it's a good project. At the same time, we have to recognize this is going to be setting an entirely new precedent for other people that want to come in and say, well, the township got one for well over 75. Why can't we? And we don't have a good reason, nor do we have a good reason as to why it's greater than 75%. it also will beg the question of any Ward 1 resident to staff. It's really nice that they're getting all these wonderful facilities on the mainland when there is not a single room in Ward 1 that can be used for meetings, for AGMs, for other things. We don't have that option that exists today. Does staff intend to remedy that sometime in the near future? I guess that's my question back to you, Rick.
For sure. So unfortunately, I can't speak to that, but I can certainly take it back to the appropriate departments and bring your question to them for response. Sorry, if I could also address your second comment, Mr. Chair, is that all right?
Yes, absolutely.
So regarding the 75% cap, so the money requested is to cover the design of the project as a whole. If council were to elect to proceed to construction, this is a fairly significant project for a municipality our size. So that 75% threshold would certainly be met at this point. And then in terms of seeking other revenue streams, the second report, staff report attached in the attached to the application, so SR 2050, does list a recommendation from council to apply to the Green and Inclusive Community Building Fund, which would provide a fair amount of funding to go towards construction should that be approved, as well as other revenue streams that staff are seeking through partnerships with either other organizations and other municipalities.
And Remy, can I?
Go ahead.
One of the grants I noticed was the closing date for it was July, I think it was July 6th. That's for, I can't remember if that was a federal grant. One of them, it looks like closed July 6th. So I just wondered if that proposal had actually been started.
Yes, so I believe what you're referring to is July 6, 2021. So that application actually went in last year.
But has it been submitted?
Yeah, so yeah, it's been submitted. It got submitted by the July 6, 2021 deadline, and official confirmation or rejection still needs to be confirmed by the funding authority.
And when do you expect that?
Hopefully soon. It's very hard to say with these sorts of projects. We were hoping to hear back in the fall of last year, but we're under the impression that announcements are imminent. So hopefully soon. I'm sorry, I can't be more precise on that one.
Christy, go ahead.
Yes, through the chair. I just have a question regarding how detailed the architectural drawings are. Are you saying that once these drawings are prepared, that it would basically be ready to go to tender?
Correct, yeah. So the level of effort required to put, or the reason the funding ask is so high is that is how much detail would be put forward in this detailed design. It would be tender ready, so to speak.
Okay, so then I'm thinking that the hope might be if you have those drawings at that detail and you are ready to go to tender, that you might be more likely to be successful in receiving federal or provincial funding?
It's hard to say. So had we had that detailed design in July of last year when the application went in, certainly at this stage, it wouldn't necessarily impact the grant that has been put forward,
Right.
But should any other opportunities come forward, then yes, it would certainly help there.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just make a
Go ahead,
point
Randy.
regarding the policy, sorry. I think, Kirk, you were speaking to it, that the grant shouldn't exceed 75% of expenditures. Is that what you were referring to? So there is, I just want to make the distinction between the community grant fund, which that 75% cap applies to that stream, the renewable energy stream. Within the policy, there is no cap on it. So just so the community is aware that there is no percentage on that.
Sorry, that actually brings up a good point. The application put forward in front of the committee also includes you might have picked up on a description of staff time that would be allotted to this project itself. So the funding request is to cover external costs. We didn't feel it would be appropriate to ask to fund staff time associated with supporting this project, but in a lot of applications that would be considered in-kind support. So if you look at the overall costs associated with putting a detailed design together, there's a lot of staff time associated with reviewing it and consulting the public and all these things that go into making sure that designs work. So that is also something that should be considered, but it's not being requested for in that $167,000 request to Ward 1.
Are we commenting?
Yep. You make comments.
I know where the 25% and the 75% comes from. It comes from what we're getting, what we're allocated in the funds. When I look at something like this, I look at population and I look at what we represent of the township as a whole. And I feel like for a project like this, it would enhance the township. It would help our community. But when I look at the 75 versus 25, I just look at, I look at the amount of people, the percentage of people that the island, like Ward 1, represents of the whole. And while I support it, it seems hard to swallow 25% versus 75% funding coming from what this project, how this project would benefit in proportion to the amount of people.
Noted. Other comments? Questions?
None for Randy, but the question becomes, is this one we as a committee want to make a recommendation on? Because it's so large and so outside the broad scope, and Randy, you're right, I said 5%, so thank you for clarifying that. I'm wondering whether it's a good idea for the committee to make any recommendation, or just make this council and say, you're money anyways. I think we all like the project because it's good for the township. I agree with your comment, Julie, that on a percentage of population wise, we're not going to see a lot of people get on the boat to come across to use it. We don't now, we won't in the future. Is it totally fair? Nothing about how this fund has been managed has been totally fair. You know, so be it. But I'm not sure I'm comfortable with this committee just going ahead and recommending this is a good one and give it a thumbs up when it is so outside the parameters that council dictated to us. And I'm sorely tempted to say no recommendation, not that, not up. But we just don't recommend because this is setting a completely new precedent above and beyond council's stated wishes to us.
Is that a motion, Kurt?
I would like to hear whether others had comments before I prepared to make it as a motion. But I want to see whether anybody else is in agreement or how others feel.
Well, it's my understanding that, Julie, what you're saying, because there's only 750 of us, 16,000, and the rest of them, you're saying, why are we contributing so much? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean,
And I agree with you. I kind of wondered that myself.
I mean,
And
we
I-
represent 5% of the population. I just find it hard to swallow 25% of funding that could be spent in Ward 1.
Why are we putting it there? And I get you. I kind of went around the table on this one in my own little head. So why are we doing it? I was very much the same as you are. However, I got thinking about all the kids I've seen get on the boat
Mm.
to go to hockey, go to swimming, and they're in, even though we only send 5 or 6 every year, they're in a pool where they get to interact with a lot of grade. One that if we had an arena and a swimming pool on the island, they wouldn't be able to do. They'd interact with the same people. But this allows them to get it. And I kind of went, that's a lot of money. When I thought we had an area that we had to stay within. So that's where I am. I'm not as deep into it as Kirk is, of course. I never will be. But I agree with you, and I kind of see where Kirk's coming from. And you're almost half, what do I say here? Do I say do this, or do I say? When really, ultimately, we have another body above us that can say what is going to happen in. So at what point do we, what do we?
Do it.
Can people remind me when, at the end of this fiscal year, the money that's sitting in Ward 1 that's left there, does it go to the reserve fund? Where does it go? Does it just sit in there?
So within the policy, it will roll over into the next year's pool. So the renewable, the vibrancy fund, the weather fund will roll into the next year's vibrancy fund. The community grant fund will roll into the community grant fund. Or if council wishes, they can roll it into the reserve fund. So at the end of each application year, after the 2 application periods have gone through, staff will bring back kind of a recap of the application periods, how much money was spent, where it went, what remains, and what council wants to do with the remaining funds, whether it just rolls over or if it goes into reserve.
Diane.
I think this is a very important discussion, and a lot of good points have been made. I particularly like Adam's. You know, there is a lot to be said by encouraging the kids to interact with the kids on the mainland, because eventually that's the way it all happens anyway. But I guess I'm kind of wishing we could do this on some sort of a without prejudice basis, rather than making it something that would set a precedent, because I think there is, you know, there are lots of discussions happening on the island about possible future projects, and given the limit that we have in the funds, limiting it to 25% really does make it difficult to not go with Julie's thinking on this. The 25% is too much for this particular one, but so I don't know how we handle that, but those are just my comments. I am in favor of the project.
Christy, anything?
Yeah, the only thing I can add, I guess, or sort of agree with everyone else, is that it's certainly a worthwhile project. I think the work needs to be done. If the township has any hope of getting funding for such a large project, I think this work has to be done, and the sooner the better. Personally, I don't like the fact that the funds need to be taken from the vibrancy fund, and especially sort of this late in the game. And I would hope that we're not going to see more of these. I would like to see some actual effort put into seeing what Ward 1 needs and what the Ward 1 residents would like. Having said that, certainly the residents will be served by the new pool and improvements to the building. So I guess what I'm saying is I do support the project in principle. I think the township needs it, and I hope that we're not setting a precedent. And I'd be prepared to to go along with this project. But I'll also qualify by saying I hope that the township really puts some effort into seeing what Ward 1 needs specifically. And I'll leave it at that.
Good.
And I just want to go back to clarify that I very much support the project. Our whole family has made use and continues to make use all of the time of the pool. I think it's good for all of kids, the community members. It's the amount, and I would, I wonder if I have a problem with the full amount, recommending the full amount. Like I feel comfortable recommending a portion of that amount, knowing that there are projects specifically for Ward 1 that would take that perhaps project proposals have not been put through yet. But I would hate to see this amount of money not be accessible to other Ward 1 projects. But if we just don't make a recommendation, like what you were talking about, so just no recommendation either down the road, and take it back to council, then they can just make a decision on our behalf. Is that what you're saying?
Usually you think.
I would like us to make some sort of recommendation that indicates our support for the project. But I'm not sure how we do that without saying we're totally happy with this. And in the end, it will be council that makes the decision anyway. But, yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if we were to move that the committee supports the project, but has concerns about the dollars and the lack of any facilities on Ward similar or whatever facilities in Ward 1. And then that's sort of where we go. So that we're saying we support the project without giving a dollar value. Identify that we have concerns about the size of the dollar value in total and the portion that is being allocated against Ward 1's money. And the lack of any facilities in Ward 1 or attempts to get that addressed.
So if I could summarize what you've said, Kurt, and you correct me if I'm wrong. So the motion is essentially to defer the application to council with recommendation that staff present alternative funding options for council's consideration such that the current amount requested from Ward 1 be reduced. And I guess to add any of that to the project is supported in principle.
I think it's important that we state right up front, we support the project. But then there's two pieces to it. One is that we are concerned about the size and like the other bits you say there, that's fine. But also the lack of a similar facility or any facility in Ward 1 or plans to even acquire one. Because to Randy's point, he said, can't answer that. The answer is because there isn't a plan. So I think I want to bring to council's attention through this committee that we support the project, but there is nothing on Ward 1. If we want to hold a meeting, we try to hold this meeting, we can't. There's the fire hall that for most groups, that's fiscally impossible because of the price tags they put on. So there's the only other thing is a gym if the school is not using it and if it's not being used for yoga or volleyball or whatever, it's not appropriate for a small meeting like this. So. Wordsmith that if you wish.
Well, I'm thinking one thing we could do, ultimately, the bare bones of what we are ultimately going to do is to defer the decision to council. What I would suggest we potentially do is that we do that, but that we essentially write a letter to be included in the agenda when the council comes to that decision, which explains in a lot more detail what we have just discussed. Because I'm not sure how to cover all of those points adequately in a motion. You know, particularly the issue of, you know, projects on the island and you know, that concern. And, you know, I mean, there's a lot more to flush out there, I would say. I don't know. Whatever we-
If I may,
Yeah, go ahead.
So something along the lines of the committee sorts the project, whoever has concerns with lack of facilities on Amherst Island, and the contributions being requested from Ward 1, therefore is deferring the application to council.
I think that's good wording, right? The other thing I would add to what Randy said is also noting the total size of the project of it being requested is well beyond the mandate the council was given to the committees based on the terms of the policy.
Say that again, if I can catch that.
That's why we're recording, isn't it?
Exactly, I'm just hoping it's picking up everything. Okay, so I have committee supports the project, whoever has concerns with lack of facilities on Amherst Island and the contribution requested from Ward 1, and therefore is deferring the application to council. And then.
And notes that the size of the request significantly exceeds the parameters in the policy that the council established and is therefore setting a precedent.
Diane.
I just have a question. Are we deferring to council's decision or are we referring the application to council?
I think referring is rather different because that's why we said right up front, we support the project.
Yeah, we're referring and deferring council's decision. This could be both.
Yeah.
So just for the purposes of order, we better get the motion on the floor first. And then we
Yes.
can talk about it. So
So
you've moved it. I need a seconder. Adam? Okay. Any other questions or comments first then? Just clarified one point, which is good. Call the question. All those in favor? Unanimous. It's carried. 7.2 Amherst Island Public School.
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Randy. Yes.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
So, questions to staff, comments on this application?
I support it. It's a good project. The only concern I have is school council constitution doesn't explicitly state that they can do something like this, other than quote, best interests of the school. I'm quite happy to let them do it. I think it's a good project. Kids are going to benefit, community is going to benefit. They've gotten the quotes, it's all fine. I would vote in favor of it.
to say something?
No, I thought the application was well put together. I thought they did a good job of stuff in their eyes, looking at the policy and making sure that they adhere to what was in there. If you know, it's something that without a play structure in.
You and I grew up with a set of monkey bars and that was it.
This is
So your
true.
cousin fell off the slide, broke her arm, they took that down. Just saying. But
So
yes, I agree with Julie and Kirk. on this. I thought the project it was very well laid out in there. And it'd be nice to maintain that play area for our youth and upcomers. People who will someday sit on this committee.
Ms. Pierce?
I also think that, I agree with all the comments that you made. I think we're gonna find that all the time, that the organizations are set up in such a way that we could probably find that in every single application, or it doesn't quite necessarily isn't tailored to this particular purpose, but I think we know what their intent is, and we all support it. To the point where I would be happy to second Kurt's motion if someone hasn't already done that. And one of the things that I think is important in the application is it did talk about not just the use on the island, but the use to, and not just use of the school, but use of people who come to the island as well. And because lots of people do visit the island, and it will, I think it will be a real asset, because especially with the development of the park across the road as well. I think it's a nice little thing that's happening here.
I didn't think you had made a motion actually, Kirk, but if you have.
Oh, sorry.
Sure. And then Diane will second it. Any further comments? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And motion is carried. Next, 7.3.
So in order.
Well, no, I just didn't want Kirk to be on the hook for something I didn't think he done. Okay, 7.3, dry stone. Questions to staff? Comments on the application? You.
It's my understanding, just,
I'm in support of the application. And it's my understanding that what's being applied in grant is just the amount that they've done, they've done most of the fundraising for this project. It's just the amount that's lacking between what they need and what they currently need. Correct? Thank you. I know that being, having attended the festivals and taken part in this and actually know that the project itself really reached out to the community and reached out to even the school as of a couple of years ago, got them engaged in building a structure on the site as well. I really feel that they do try to touch most of the community. So.
The parts that they're asking the township to fund are the ones that are allowed in the policy. And the other fundraising they've done are the items that are outside town policy. So they clearly looked at it. They're asking for the appropriate stuff, which is all good. The only points I mentioned, she's asked for, she's noted that it's this number plus HST, and that some of the estimates are somewhat questionable because of the joys of inflation these days, right? Unfortunately, that's the number she's asked for, so that's all we can give her. That's my interpretation. Yeah, unless somebody has other. So it's something that we can in fact carry forward to our later discussion that talks about, we should talk about contingencies, we should talk about estimates, we should talk about HSD and other taxes and how that needs to be shown in here. It is not specifically mentioned in the policy. I will make the motion because if I've already done the other two. It's somebody else's turn.
Yes.
I'm happy
So,
that we provide something.
so moved, Julie's moved to approve the application, seconder, Adam. Any questions, further comments? All the question, all those in favor? Motion's carried. So now we come to the amended portion of the agenda, the first of which is to receive the financials. As they're presented in front of us here on hard copy. Kurt, I know you have some questions.
No,
Our staff,
no, fine.
fine? Yep. Okay. Any other questions? No?
Can somebody just clarify, sorry, I'm being a little dense on the reserve fund. The reserve fund is specifically for Ward 1, that's Ward 1's reserve fund, yes? Okay,
For 2 and 3 as well.
and the money that's in the reserve fund just sits there. And
It sits forever to fund.
afterwards. Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, can I get a motion to receive that? Julie, seconded by Kurt. All those in favor? Carries. Number 2 on the amended portion of the agenda is update on the Ward 2-3 applications.
Last time, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Last time we saw that we had a chance to see all of the applications that came in. We have sent both, even though we're separate subcommittees, we both get to see each other's.
Okay.
That's a value because it gets a flavor of what's happening, who's where, and are there things that should cross?
Yeah.
I have the discussion later about whether there really should be one committee as opposed to 2 subcommittees, but that's part of the reason to see. So if I may suggest to staff through the chair, that should be a standard item for us. I don't know how everybody else feels, but just having an understanding, I'm less concerned about whether they do or don't approve something, that's their business. But understanding what's being asked for and understanding the quality of the applications that are coming in is important for us.
Yeah, are we setting the bar too high? That kind of idea.
Yeah, exactly. Brandy, for your info, if you want, one of the action items coming out of last meeting was we had one group that were having some challenges putting their applications together. Not only did we sit down specifically with that group, but we also held on the island a seminar session for anybody who wanted to come about how to do the applications.
Okay.
So there was both a focused and a general population one, which we could run here as well on the mainland, but don't know whether they've got a problem or not.
Now with application, staff are always available to assist with the applications. So, you know, if you know any groups that ever need direction, you can always just come to us. But yeah, that was one of the requests from Ward 2-3 is there are some applications that may come through that would be applicable to both wards, and it would be nice if maybe sometimes applications are being reviewed together rather than separate, and they wanted to make sure that this committee was aware of how they voted on the township application. So that's something we can bring back to council, whether the policy gets amended to have one committee, or whether it's, you know, if there's a group asking for funding from both wards, that we just meet as one big committee and then they go back to their subcommittees. But that would be at the discretion of council. And that'll be kind of a wrap-up report to council from staff is kind of going through the issues that the committee has brought forward.
Just out of interest, how many applications did Q3 receive this time?
So they had one from the vibrancy committee, which was from for the vibrancy funds, which was from the township. And then they had 2 applications for the community grant, all which were approved. And the agendas and all of the information is published on iCompass. So the information is there, but I can send out an email to let the other committee, to let committee members know when the agendas are being published, whether you're in the Ward 1 subcommittee or the Ward 2-3 subcommittee.
Okay, and then item number 3 on the amended agenda. I have the heading of policy review, because as we discussed in the last meeting, we did want to meet again before the end of this term of council to have some recommendations for a review of the policy, but with particular respect to the application process, which, as we discussed, it's got some issues, some teething problems, particularly with respect to how the policy is written, how some applications, we support in principle, but don't exactly adhere to the policy. Kirk, you wanted to bring it up, so comments.
I'm assuming we want to tackle it with this meeting as opposed to a separate meeting.
Mr. Chair, yeah, just as per the minutes from the first committee, the motion was to review it after the second application intake. So to me, it was going to be a separate meeting rather than going over it during the application review, is how I interpreted that.
That's how I interpreted it too. So,
Okay,
Yeah.
in which case, we need to set a date.
yes, yeah. Diane.
And would that review be done jointly with the 2-3, Ward 2-3 committee, or would we?
That I can see the benefit of that, but
Yep.
that.
We could, if it's the will of the committee, we can certainly invite the other committees to partake in that.
May as well. Policies.
Mhm.
Policy.
It's a vote, so, yeah.
So, would you be willing to make a motion? Victor or Diane?
I'd be happy to make the motion to move that we set a date for it. Maybe, I don't know, it must be a little bit hard to set a date right now. But I would propose that we set a date to review the policy and the application, and invite the Ward 2-3 to participate if they wish.
Everybody clear on that motion? I get a second for it? Kurt? Any discussion on it? I mean, obviously the date. Brandy's usually the one that coordinates this all into our little corral for what dates.
Our good dogs.
And she'll need to do that for the 2-3 committee should they decide to take us up on the offer. So I'm not sure we can set it in stone.
The only question I have would be sooner rather than later, because
Just
you have the issue of when council stands down, and the need to get this in front of council now rather than agree with the new council. Even if we don't have perfect attendance from, motion is a joint meeting to discuss the policy, discuss and review the policy and the application form. But it's to be done sooner rather than later, so that it goes, when does council stand down?
How do you like the
When's your last meeting?
just went through that this last. just the report on the lame duck period.
Yeah.
Randy will be able to pull it up faster than me.
While Brandon's doing that, is there anything we can do in advance to accelerate the process?
I was thinking that. I was thinking that if, again, putting Brandy on the spot because she's the staff person, I think if she was able to collate, what our concerns are. I mean, obviously, every one of us is going through the policy and have particular concerns. And even if all of us, mention the same, the same things, as I say, having Brandy collate all of that. To have some sort of meat and potatoes on the table when we meet. I would say, like, in the meantime, our comments, questions on the policy be submitted to Brandy in advance of that meeting.
Yeah, so I can't find it. I don't see it listed in that report that warrant. Just speaking to restrictions.
It was.
Okay. So the new term of council is November 15th. So I believe the last meeting is I want to say October 3rd.
So it'll be in before that.
Yes, so if I may, the report with both subcommittees' recommendations is going to July 11th council meeting. So, and then in order to prepare agenda and get everyone together, I would suggest that we look at meeting mid-August. To
Stay
get
out of that week.
stay out.
Stay out of that week. Not the week or the week out. Stay out of that week.
So
I saw which one you would point.
August 15th.
Yeah, I managed to finally get holidays.
Okay. So the biggest thing is just it's getting everyone together. It's summertime, I know people have vacation. So I'm just looking at the motion. So maybe it is to direct staff to arrange a date for a joint meeting. And then I can reach out everyone and try to get it like before September.
Because I think we got a target of council meeting mid-September, not later.
Yeah, because in order to take the feedback from the committees, we then need the time to, so in my head, I'm thinking hopefully we can arrange it for August and then I can get the staff report prepared for September.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And that was moved by Diane, seconded by Kirk. This is in the minutes. Any further questions?
I have one question, just since you're talking about dates. If this is going, if our decisions today are going to the July 11th meeting, assuming council approves, when do people get their checks?
Probably within a week or two window. So once council has given the direction to staff to approve them, it's just a matter of requesting finance prepare the financials to distribute. So basically cutting a check.
The reason I bring it up, Mr. Chair, is that I did have feedback from one of the groups that we approved on March 29th meeting. That it became very difficult for them to spend the money as planned because they didn't get their check till May. So I hear what you're saying, that it's sort of a week later, but I'm just saying, that's one of the parts of the process that we maybe need to think about. Because when somebody in an organization puts in a request in, in January, for the 1st of February, and they're not getting a check until mid-May, 24th of May, it's a little awkward because we insist that they spend it on what, as we rightly should, they spend it on what they asked for.
Was that something that we could include in the emails when we discuss having one of these meetings, is when if we pick a date, what council meeting will that recommendation go to? You know what I mean?
No, sorry, can you?
Well, we met on the 28th of March. So as soon as you gave me the date, I knew we weren't going to make the 1st of April council meeting. There wasn't enough time to prepare.
Yeah.
So that meant that it would be the first week or two of May that the council meeting would next see that those applications or our recommendations, which means 2 weeks after that. So you're looking at a 6-week time difference. If somebody put in an application to those grants on the 1st of March with a timeline that began the 1st of April or the middle of April, they're already 3 to 4 weeks behind before the council even hears the recommendation. So knowing when we sit down for this meeting today, as you said, recommendations from today's meeting will make the July 11th council meeting. We know that going into it. So if we looked at something, we could see the timeline that they prepared. We know that we were going to make it in time or not make it in time. And then we can adjust ours to say, is there room on a council agenda? And I have no idea. Is there room that should we find an application that has a timeline in it that needs to be sped up, that we can push that to council?
Yeah. One of the points, the feedback from the Ward 2-3 committee is that some of these organizations are delayed getting the funding, so they've already started their projects. So what they want to recommend for a policy change is having application periods available quarterly instead of just twice a year, so people can better plan. So we do try to, within the policy, have a timeline. Okay, we accept these applications up until this point, but then it does take, it takes staff time to write the report, to arrange the meeting, meet with the committee, bring those recommendations back to council, and then get the funds into the group's hands. So there can be a delayed period, and especially if there's other things going on, and sometimes it can get pushed back a bit, unfortunately. So if it was quarterly, that might help with that issue. So yeah, I don't know if that-
Because then you could have the council, which is automatically the first of every quarter, have a spot that would review subcommittees, findings, or recommendation.
Probably have a discussion that we want to have, right?
I was gonna say, yeah, and the fact that 2 and 3 have raised it is good, that it sets fertile ground for us to have something in common. Okay, well, I will call the question. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Seeing no other business, upcoming meeting dates, obviously that will be in flux, but we're expecting in August, not during Adam's vacation. And I will call for an adjournment, a motion to adjourn. Julie, seconded by Diane. All those in favor? Carried. We are adjourned at 6:58. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for those observing the meeting.